The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when death came knocking at Eva Blackthorn's door. She heard the horse first, hooves stumbling through knee-deep snow, the animal's labored breathing cutting through the howling wind. Then came the sound that made her blood freeze, the heavy thud of a body hitting the ground just beyond her porch. Eva pressed herself against the cabin wall, rifle in hand, peering through the frost-covered window at the figure sprawled in the snow. Even through the swirling white, she could see he was large, dangerous-looking, with a gun belt that marked him as the kind of man decent women crossed the street to avoid. Ruby stirred in her small bed near the fireplace, her 6-year-old face flushed with fever. Eva's heart clenched. Her daughter had been sick for 2 days, and they were running dangerously low on medicine. The nearest doctor was in Crimson Falls, 20 miles through mountain passes that were now completely impassable. A weak knock echoed through the cabin. "Please," came a voice rough with cold and exhaustion. "I know you're in there. Just need shelter till the storm passes." Eva's grip tightened on her rifle. 3 years of widowhood in the Colorado wilderness had taught her hard lessons about trusting strangers, especially strangers who carried themselves like killers. "Go away," she called through the door. "There's nothing for you here." "Ma'am, my horse is down. I'm hurt. Won't make it through the night if—" "Not my problem." But even as she said it, Eva felt the familiar tug of conscience that had gotten her into trouble before. Her late husband, Thomas, had always said her kindness would be the death of her. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm's fury and Ruby's labored breathing. Through the window, Eva watched the man struggle to his feet, swaying dangerously. Blood stained the snow beneath him. "Please don't come inside," she said, her voice carrying a warning sharp as winter steel. "I've got a sick child and a loaded gun. Whatever you're running from, whatever you've done, keep moving." The stranger raised his head, and for one heart-stopping moment, his eyes met hers through the glass. Even at a distance, even through the storm, she could see something in those dark depths that made her breath catch. Not just desperation, she'd seen plenty of that. This was something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. "I'm not here to hurt you, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite the wind. "Name's Colt Ravencrest, and I know who you are, Eva Blackthorn." The sound of her name on this dangerous stranger's lips sent ice through her veins. How did he know her? What did he want? In Crimson Falls, Eva Blackthorn was known as the Cursed Widow, the woman whose touch could heal or harm depending on whispered rumors. Most folks avoided her isolated homestead like they might a plague house. But this man, this Colt Ravencrest, had sought her out deliberately. And as Ruby's fevered whimper pierced the storm-darkened cabin, Eva realized that sometimes death wore a familiar face, and sometimes salvation came wrapped in danger. Eva's hands trembled as she watched Colt Ravencrest struggle to remain upright in the deepening snow. Blood continued to seep from somewhere beneath his dark coat, staining the pristine white around him crimson. Behind her, Ruby's breathing had grown more labored, each small cough like a knife to Eva's heart. She was trapped between two impossible choices: let a dangerous stranger into her home, or watch him die on her doorstep while her daughter burned with fever. "How do you know my name?" Eva called through the door, rifle still trained on the window. "Your husband," Colt replied, his voice growing weaker. "Thomas Blackthorn. He saved my life once. Told me if I ever needed help, his wife in the mountains was the kind of woman who could work miracles." Eva's breath caught. Thomas had been gone 3 years, killed in the copper mine collapse that had taken 12 other men. He'd rarely spoken of his past, but she knew he'd traveled widely before settling in Crimson Falls. "Thomas never mentioned anyone named Ravencrest," she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Colt managed a bitter laugh that ended in a cough. "He knew me by a different name then, before I became what I am now." He swayed dangerously. "Look, ma'am, I'm not going to make it much longer out here. And if what I've heard about your daughter's sickness is true, you need what I can offer as much as I need shelter." "What do you mean?" Eva demanded, though her heart already knew the answer. "There's medicine in my saddlebags. Real medicine from Denver. Fever reducers, tonics, things that could save the little one." His voice grew strained. But if I die out here, Ruby dies too. The words hit Eva like a physical blow. Medicine. Real medicine, not just the herbs and remedies she'd been desperately trying to make work. Ruby had been fighting this fever for days, and Eva could see her daughter weakening by the hour. Through the window, she watched Colt's legs buckle. He caught himself against the porch railing, but barely. Blood now pooled steadily in the snow beneath him. "Mama." Ruby's weak voice came from behind her. "Who's outside?" Eva turned to see her daughter trying to sit up, her small face pale except for the fever-bright spots on her cheeks. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and when she coughed, it was the deep, rattling sound that had been keeping Eva awake for nights. "Just a traveler, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Ruby was looking toward the window with the strange perception children sometimes possessed. "He's hurt bad, isn't he?" Eva closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Every instinct screamed that Colt Ravencrest was dangerous, that letting him inside would bring death to her door in a different form. But Ruby was dying slowly before her eyes, and this stranger claimed to have the medicine that could save her. Another wet cough from Ruby made the decision for her. "If you so much as look at my daughter wrong," Eva called to Colt, "I'll put a bullet through your heart without hesitation." "Understood," he replied simply. Eva unbarred the door, but kept her rifle ready as she opened it. The wind immediately drove snow into the cabin, and the cold hit her like a slap. Colt stood hunched on her porch, one hand pressed to his side, the other gripping the railing for support. Up close, she could see he was even more dangerous looking than she'd thought. Tall and broad-shouldered despite his current weakness, with the weathered face of a man who'd lived hard under an unforgiving sun. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, and when he raised his eyes to meet hers, she saw they were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, and holding secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to know. But it was the gentleness in those eyes when they shifted to Ruby that made Ava's grip on the rifle relax slightly. "She's burning up," he observed quietly. "3 days now. I've tried everything I know, but nothing's working." Eva stepped back reluctantly. "The medicine you mentioned?" Colt nodded toward his fallen horse. "In the saddlebags, but I'll need help getting to them." Eva looked at the horse lying motionless in the snow, then back at Colt's bloodied condition. "You're in no shape to go anywhere. Then we'd better hurry." Against every instinct, Eva propped her rifle by the door and moved to support Colt's uninjured side. The moment she touched him, she felt the fever burning through his clothes. He was in worse shape than he'd let on, running on pure will and determination. They struggled through the snow to where his horse had fallen. The animal was dead, its breath no longer misting in the frigid air. But the saddlebags were intact, and when Colt directed her to the right pouch, Eva's hands found a collection of small bottles and packets that looked more professional than anything she'd ever seen. "The blue bottle," Colt instructed, leaning heavily against her. "Willow bark extract, concentrated. 2 drops in warm water every 4 hours. The white powder is for her chest. Mix it with honey if you have it." Eva stared at the medicines in wonder. These weren't frontier remedies or folk cures. These were real pharmaceuticals, the kind only wealthy people in big cities could afford. "Where did you get these?" Denver was heading there on business when the storm hit. Colt's breathing was becoming more labored. "Thought they might come in handy." They made their way back to the cabin, Colt's weight increasing against her with each step. By the time they reached the door, Eva was half carrying him. She helped him to the chair by the fire, then immediately went to Ruby with the medicine. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open as Eva gently lifted her head. "Is that the man who's hurt, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart. He brought medicine for you." Ruby's gaze shifted to Colt, who was slumped in the chair, eyes closed, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "He looks sad," she observed with a child's uncanny intuition. "Drink this," Eva said, offering the willow bark mixture. Ruby obediently swallowed the bitter medicine, then settled back against her pillow. Only then did Eva turn her attention to Colt. In the firelight, she could see the full extent of his condition. His coat was soaked with blood on the left side, and when she helped him remove it, she found a bullet wound just below his ribs. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched," she said, falling into the practical mindset that had gotten her through 3 years of frontier widowhood. Colt opened his eyes, studying her face. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You brought medicine for Ruby. I'm not going to let you bleed to death in my chair. She gathered her supplies, clean cloth, needle and thread, a bottle of whiskey Thomas had left behind. As she worked to clean the wound, Colt remained stoically silent, though she could see the muscles in his jaw clench with each probe of her fingers. The bullet's still in there, she murmured. I know. Haven't had a chance to dig it out. Eva met his eyes. This is going to hurt. Most things worth doing do. As she worked, Eva found herself stealing glances at his face. The harsh lines she'd initially seen were softened by exhaustion, and there was something almost vulnerable about the way he watched Ruby sleep by the fire. You said Thomas saved your life, she said quietly, trying to distract them both from the grim work. 5 years ago. I was, different then. Younger. More foolish. Colt's voice was tight with pain. Thought I could take on 3 men in a saloon fight. Thomas stepped in when it went bad. That sounds like him. He never could stand to see unfair odds. Said he had a wife who'd worry if he didn't come home. Talked about you and your future family like you were the most precious things in the world. Eva's hands stilled for a moment. He wanted children so badly. We'd been trying for years when Ruby came along. He was so happy when we found her. Found her? Her parents died in a cholera outbreak. She was barely 2, and no one else would take her. Eva resumed her work, memories softening her voice. Thomas said she was meant to be ours. Colt was quiet for a long moment. He was a good man. The best. Eva finally located the bullet and began the delicate work of extraction. Which makes me wonder what a man like Thomas would see in someone like you. Someone like me? Eva gave him a direct look. Don't play innocent. I've heard the stories about Colt Ravencrest. They call you the Raven, and not because you're gentle. Colt's smile was bitter. Stories have a way of growing in the telling. Are you saying they're not true? I'm saying there's usually more to a story than what gets told in saloons. Eva pulled the bullet free, and Colt's sharp intake of breath ended their conversation for the moment. She cleaned the wound thoroughly, then began stitching it closed with careful precision. Why are you really here? She asked as she worked. I told you the truth, Colt. Thomas may have mentioned me, but that doesn't explain why you'd risk your life in a blizzard to reach my cabin, specifically. Colt was quiet for so long that Eva thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm tired of running. Tired of being what people expect me to be. And because Thomas said if I ever wanted to find a different path, his wife would know how to help a man start over. Eva tied off the final stitch, then sat back to study his face. And you think I can do that? I think you're the only chance I've got left. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, as if the storm intended to trap them together until something was resolved between them. Eva looked from this dangerous stranger to her sleeping daughter, then to the medicine bottles that might save Ruby's life. She was beginning to realize that sometimes salvation and damnation wore the same face. Eva woke before dawn to the sound of Ruby's breathing, deeper and more even than it had been in days. The fever had finally broken sometime during the night, leaving her daughter sleeping peacefully for the first time since the illness began. Colt Ravencrest sat exactly where she'd left him hours earlier, slumped in the chair by the fire, his eyes closed but his posture suggesting he wasn't truly asleep. Men like him, Eva had learned from Thomas's stories, rarely allowed themselves the vulnerability of deep sleep in unfamiliar places. She moved quietly to check on Ruby, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's forehead. Cool. The medicine had worked. How is she? Colt's voice was barely above a whisper, but Eva still startled slightly. His eyes remained closed, but she could tell he was fully alert. Better. The fever broke. Eva pulled a blanket up to Ruby's chin. Thank you. Those medicines saved her life. Just glad they helped. Eva studied his profile in the firelight. Even wounded and exhausted, there was something coiled about him, like a predator that could spring into action at any moment. Yet his first concern upon waking was for a child he barely knew. You should try to sleep properly, she said. You lost a lot of blood. I'll be fine. You'll be dead if you don't rest. That wound needs time to heal. Colt finally opened his eyes, those storm-gray depths finding hers across the dim cabin. Not used to people worrying about my health, Mrs. Blackthorne. Eva, she corrected automatically. And I'm not worried about you. I'm practical. Dead men can't help with chores, and I've got a homestead to maintain. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Practical. I can respect that. Outside, the wind had finally died down, leaving an eerie quiet that suggested the storm might be passing. Eva moved to the window and peered through the frost-covered glass. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, and everything beyond was buried in pristine white. We'll be snowed in for days, she said. Maybe a week. I can make camp in your barn once the weather. No. Eva's voice was firm. You'll stay here until you're healed. I won't have a man's death on my conscience because I was too proud to offer proper shelter. Colt studied her for a long moment. Thomas was right about you. What did he say? That you had the strongest moral compass of anyone he'd ever met. Said it sometimes got you into trouble because you couldn't stand to see suffering, even when helping might cost you. Eva felt warmth spread through her chest at the memory of her husband's faith in her. He always saw the best in people, including me, apparently. There was something bitter in Colt's tone that made Eva look at him more closely. You don't think you deserved his help? I know I didn't. Colt shifted in the chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. I was younger then, angrier, looking for fights and finding them in all the wrong places. What changed? Colt was quiet for so long that Eva thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested old pain. I killed a man. Not in a fair fight, not in self-defense. Just killed him because I was paid to. He met her eyes without flinching. That's when I realized what I'd become. Eva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. You're a killer for hire. Was. Past tense. Colt's jaw tightened. Been trying to leave that life behind for 2 years now. Hasn't been easy. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what kind of man you're sheltering. And because if I'm going to ask for your help starting over, you should understand what you'd be taking on. Eva absorbed this information, weighing it against what she'd observed. The stories about you, how much is true? Most of it, maybe worse than most of it. Colt's honesty was brutal, unflinching. I've done things that would keep you awake at night if you knew the details. But you saved Ruby's life. That doesn't balance the scales. Eva moved to the stove, needing something to do with her hands while she processed this revelation. As she prepared coffee, she found herself thinking about the man who'd brought medicine through a blizzard, who'd asked about Ruby's welfare before his own, who'd been honest about his past when lying would have been easier. People change, she said finally. Do they? Or do they just get better at hiding what they really are? Eva poured coffee into 2 tin cups, then carried one to Colt. I think that depends on whether they want to change or just want to escape consequences. Colt accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. And which do you think I want? I think if you just wanted to escape consequences, you'd have kept running instead of looking for redemption. Redemption? Colt tested the word like it was foreign to him. That's a pretty word for an ugly process. Most worthwhile things are ugly in the beginning. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to seep through the windows, revealing a world transformed by snow. Mama? Ruby's sleepy voice drew their attention. She was sitting up, looking around with clear eyes for the first time in days. How do you feel, sweetheart? Eva hurried to her daughter's side. Hungry, Ruby said simply, then noticed Colt watching them. You're still here. Storm's not over yet, Colt replied gently. Is it all right if I stay a little longer? Ruby studied him with the solemn consideration children brought to important matters. Are you still hurt? Some. Your mama fixed me up pretty well, though. She's good at fixing things. Ruby's voice carried the absolute confidence children had in their parents' abilities. She fixed my doll when the arm came off, and she fixed Mr. Peterson's horse when it got colic. Sounds like I'm in good hands then. Eva watched this exchange with growing amazement. Colt's entire demeanor changed when speaking to Ruby. His voice gentled, his posture relaxed, and something that might have been vulnerability flickered in his eyes. "Are you hungry too?" Ruby asked Colt with the matter-of-fact concern children showed for anyone in their orbit. "I could eat something," Colt admitted. "Mama makes really good biscuits, and sometimes she lets me help." Eva found herself smiling despite everything. "Well, if Ruby's offering to help, I suppose we should make a proper breakfast." As Eva prepared to cook, Ruby chattered to Colt about her favorite things. Her doll, the stories her mother told, the wild animals she sometimes saw from the window. Colt listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed he was really hearing her words. "Do you have any children?" Ruby asked with typical directness. Colt's expression grew distant. "No, never really thought I was the type to be a father." "Why not?" "Ruby?" Eva warned gently, recognizing dangerous territory. But Colt answered honestly, "Because fathers are supposed to protect their children, and I've spent most of my life being the kind of man other fathers protect their children from." Ruby considered this with the seriousness she brought to all adult conversations. "But you protected me. You brought medicine when I was sick." "That's different." "How?" Colt looked to Eva for help, but she was curious to hear his answer too. I guess I don't know," he admitted finally. Ruby nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Mama says sometimes we don't know why we do good things. We just do them because they feel right." "Your mama sounds very wise." "She is. She knows everything." Eva felt her cheeks warm at her daughter's absolute faith. "Not everything, sweetheart." As she cooked breakfast, Eva found herself watching Colt interact with Ruby. He was careful around her, gentle in a way that seemed to surprise even him. When Ruby showed him her doll, a simple creation Eva had sewn from scraps, he examined it with the same attention he might give a fine piece of craftsmanship. "She's beautiful," he told Ruby seriously. "What's her name?" "Molly. Mama made her for me when I first came to live here." "When you first came to live here?" Ruby launched into the story of her adoption with the unself-conscious honesty of childhood. Eva had always been open about Ruby's origins, never wanting her daughter to feel there was shame in being chosen rather than born to them. "So Mom and Papa picked me special," Ruby concluded, "like choosing the prettiest flower in the garden." Colt's eyes found Eva's across the cabin. "You were lucky to find such a good family." "I know," Ruby said simply. "Even though Papa had to go to heaven, Mama and me still have each other." The matter-of-fact way Ruby spoke about Thomas's death made something tighten in Colt's expression. Eva had worked hard to help her daughter understand loss without fear, but it was still jarring to hear such acceptance from someone so young. "Do you miss him?" Colt asked quietly. "Every day, but Mama says love doesn't stop just because someone goes away. It just changes shape." "Changes shape?" Ruby nodded solemnly. "Like water becoming ice. Still water, just different." Colt was quiet for a long moment, studying the little girl who spoke about love and loss with such wisdom. "Your mama taught you that?" "Uh-huh. She says lots of smart things." As they ate breakfast together, Eva's fluffy biscuits with honey and preserves, something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. The wariness that had marked their initial interactions began to ease, replaced by something that might eventually become trust. But Eva still caught Colt watching the windows, still noticed how he positioned himself where he could see both the door and Ruby. Whatever he was running from hadn't disappeared just because he'd found temporary shelter, and she was beginning to realize that bringing Colt Ravencrest into their lives might change everything. For better or worse remained to be seen. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a world of pristine white that sparkled like diamonds under the morning sun. Eva stood on her porch, breathing in the sharp, clean air while assessing the damage to her homestead. Snow had drifted nearly to the cabin's eaves on the north side, and she could barely make out the outline of her barn in the distance. Behind her, she could hear Ruby's delighted laughter as Colt helped her build a snowman near the window, where she could see it from inside. In the past 3 days, an easy routine had developed between them. Colt had proven surprisingly helpful despite his injury, splitting kindling one-handed, mending a broken chair leg, even helping Ruby with the simple lessons Eva taught her each day. But now that the storm had passed, reality was returning. Soon someone from Crimson Falls would make the trek up the mountain to check on the isolated widow and her child. And when they did, they would find Colt Ravencrest, a man whose reputation had traveled far beyond Colorado territory. The trail's going to be impassable for another day or two, Colt observed, joining her on the porch. His color had improved significantly, though he still moved carefully to protect his healing wound. Long enough for you to decide what you're going to do, Eva replied, not looking at him. When someone does make it up here, they'll recognize you. Worried about your reputation? Eva turned to face him, noting the defensive edge that had crept into his voice. I'm worried about Ruby. And about you, if you want the truth. Me? Judge Blackwood has been looking for an excuse to declare me an unfit mother and take custody of Ruby. Having a known gunslinger staying in my home would give him all the ammunition he needs. Colt's expression darkened. Judge Blackwood? Aldrich Blackwood. He owns most of the mining operations around Crimson Falls, and he's had his eye on this land for years. Claims a woman alone can't properly maintain a homestead this size. Eva's jaw tightened with old anger. He's been pressuring me to sell ever since Thomas died. And if you won't sell, then he'll find a legal way to take it. Claiming Ruby isn't safe here would be perfect for his purposes. Colt was quiet for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the snow-covered landscape. This is good land. Strategic position, fresh water, timber rights, worth fighting for. Thomas thought so. He said this place could support a dozen families if it was developed right. Eva pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. But one woman and a child can't hold it against men like Blackwood. What if it wasn't just one woman? Eva looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time I stopped running and started standing for something worth protecting. Before Eva could respond, the sound of approaching horses carried across the frozen air. 3 riders were making their way up the mountain trail, their horses stepping carefully through the deep snow. That's Dr. Morrison's bay, Eva said, recognizing the lead horse, and Sheriff Caldwell's roan. The 3rd rider? Eva's heart sank as she recognized the expensive horse and fine coat. Judge Blackwood himself. Colt's hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt, then stopped. I should go. Where? There's nowhere to run in this snow, and you're in no condition for a chase. Eva made a quick decision. Help me get Ruby inside, then sit in the chair by the fire. Try to look like an invalid. Eva, do it, and let me do the talking. They hurried inside where Ruby was adding the finishing touches to a small snow sculpture by the window. Mama, people are coming, she announced excitedly. I know, sweetheart. Why don't you play with Molly while Mama talks to our visitors? Colt settled into the chair by the fire, and Eva quickly draped a blanket over him, arranging it to hide his gun belt. To anyone glancing in, he would look like a patient recovering from illness rather than a dangerous gunslinger. The riders reached the cabin just as Eva stepped onto the porch. Dr. Morrison, a kindly man in his 60s, looked genuinely relieved to see her. Sheriff Caldwell, younger and more ambitious, seemed disappointed that his dangerous journey had found nothing amiss. But it was Judge Blackwood who commanded attention, a tall, silver-haired man whose expensive clothes and imperious bearing marked him as someone accustomed to power. Mrs. Blackthorne, Dr. Morrison called out as he dismounted. Thank heavens you're all right. We've been worried sick about you and little Ruby. We're fine, Doctor. The cabin's well built, and we had plenty of supplies. Nevertheless, Judge Blackwood interjected, his cultured voice carrying clear disapproval, this storm demonstrates exactly why this arrangement is unsuitable. A woman and child have no business living in such isolation. This is our home, Judge Blackwood. We manage quite well. Sheriff Caldwell was studying the area around the cabin with professional interest. Lot of tracks here, Mrs. Blackthorne. Looks like you had company during the storm. Eva's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. A traveler took shelter here. He was badly injured and couldn't continue in the storm. What kind of traveler? Blackwood's eyes sharpened with interest. The kind who needed medical attention, Eva replied firmly, as any Christian woman would provide. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, concern evident in his weathered features. Is he still here? I should examine him. That won't be necessary. His fever broke yesterday, and he's recovering well. I insist on seeing this mysterious guest, Blackwood declared, moving toward the cabin door. As a judge, I have a responsibility to ensure the safety of this community. Eva positioned herself between Blackwood and the door. He's sleeping. And frankly, Judge, I don't see how a sick man poses any threat to the community. That depends on who the man is, Sheriff Caldwell observed. Mind if we take a look? Eva realized she had no choice. Refusing would only increase their suspicions. Very well, but please keep your voices down. Ruby's inside. They entered the cabin, and Eva held her breath as 3 pairs of eyes took in the scene. Ruby sat on her small bed, playing quietly with her doll. Colt remained in his chair by the fire, the blanket pulled up to his chin, his eyes closed as if sleeping. "Good Lord," Dr. Morrison exclaimed, moving toward Colt. "This man's been shot." "A hunting accident," Eva said quickly. "He was delirious with fever when he arrived." Dr. Morrison began to examine Colt, who remained convincingly unconscious. "Excellent work on these stitches, Mrs. Blackthorne. You may have saved his life." "Who is he?" Sheriff Caldwell demanded, studying Colt's face intently. Eva's mouth went dry. Even weakened and pale, Colt Ravencrest was a distinctive-looking man. It was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. "Says his name is Cole Raven," Eva lied smoothly. "He was traveling to Denver when the storm caught him." Judge Blackwood moved closer, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Cole Raven? I don't recognize the name." "He's not from around here," Eva replied. "Mentioned coming from Kansas." "Strange," Blackwood mused. "A man travels all the way from Kansas to Colorado, gets shot in a hunting accident, and just happens to find shelter with the most notorious widow in 3 counties. Notorious? Eva's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Come now, Mrs. Blackthorne. The entire territory knows about your unusual situation, living alone, practicing folk medicine, refusing to remarry or sell your land. It's hardly conventional." Dr. Morrison looked up from his examination of Colt. "There's nothing unusual about a widow maintaining her independence, Judge. And Mrs. Blackthorne's medical knowledge has been invaluable to this community." "Has it?" Blackwood's smile was cold. "I've heard rumors about her remedies. Some say they work too well to be natural." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Eva felt the familiar chill of community suspicion, the whispered suggestions that her healing abilities came from sources the church wouldn't approve of. "My remedies work because I study and practice," Eva said firmly. "There's nothing supernatural about knowledge." "Nevertheless," Sheriff Caldwell interjected, "harboring strangers isn't wise, Mrs. Blackthorne. How do you know this man isn't dangerous?" "Because dangerous men don't arrive half dead from blood loss," Eva replied, "and because I can usually tell when someone means harm." "Can you?" Blackwood's voice carried skeptical amusement. "How remarkably convenient." At that moment, Ruby looked up from her doll. "Mr. Raven isn't dangerous. He helped me feel better when I was sick." All eyes turned to the little girl, who continued with the innocent honesty of childhood. "He brought medicine from far away, and he knows lots of stories about horses." Dr. Morrison smiled at Ruby's earnest defense. "Is that so?" "Well, any man who's kind to children can't be all bad." But Sheriff Caldwell was frowning. "You said he was delirious with fever, Mrs. Blackthorne? How could he have been telling stories?" Eva's heart sank. Ruby's innocent comment had created a dangerous inconsistency in her story. "He's been conscious off and on," she said carefully. "Fever comes and goes." Judge Blackwood was studying Colt's face with renewed interest. "You know, Sheriff, there's something familiar about this man. Something I can't quite place." Eva felt the walls closing in around them. If Blackwood recognized Colt, everything would be over. Ruby would be taken from her, the homestead would be seized, and Colt would likely face a noose. "Perhaps," she said desperately, "we should let him rest." Dr. Morrison said he needs sleep to recover. "Actually," Dr. Morrison said, straightening from his examination, "he should be fine to travel in a day or 2. The wound is healing well, and his color's much improved." "Excellent," Blackwood declared. "Then he can continue on his way to Denver and leave Mrs. Blackthorne to her solitude." But his eyes remained fixed on Colt's face, and Eva could see the wheels turning in his calculating mind. Time was running out. Soon, very soon, Judge Blackwood would remember where he'd seen that face before. And when he did, the fragile peace they'd built in the snow-covered cabin would shatter like ice in spring. The silence in the cabin stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. Eva watched Judge Blackwood's face with growing dread as his eyes remained fixed on Colt's supposedly sleeping form. She could practically see the moment of recognition dawning in the judge's calculating gaze. "Sheriff Caldwell," Blackwood said slowly, never taking his eyes off Colt. "Doesn't this man remind you of someone? That jawline, the scar just above his left eyebrow?" Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't noticed the scar before, but now she could see it, a thin white line that marked Colt's face like a signature. Sheriff Caldwell moved closer, his hand instinctively drifting toward his weapon. "Now that you mention it, Judge, there is something familiar." "Mama?" Ruby's small voice cut through the tension. "Why is everyone staring at Mr. Raven?" Dr. Morrison glanced between the adults, sensing the undercurrent of danger, but not understanding its source. "Perhaps we should let the man rest. He's clearly still recovering." But Blackwood held up a silencing hand, his attention completely focused on Colt. "I've seen that face on wanted posters, Sheriff. I'm certain of it." Eva felt the walls closing in around them. In desperation, she stepped between Blackwood and the chair where Colt lay. "Judge Blackwood, I really must insist." "Step aside, Mrs. Blackthorne." Blackwood's voice carried the cold authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "If this man is who I think he is, you're harboring a dangerous criminal." The word criminal seemed to echo in the small cabin. Ruby looked up from her doll with wide, confused eyes, while Dr. Morrison took an unconscious step backward. "There must be some mistake," Eva said firmly. "This man was dying when he arrived." "He's been nothing but grateful for our help." "Gratitude can be an excellent disguise," Blackwood replied. "Sheriff, I believe we're looking at Colt Ravencrest." The Raven. There's a $500 bounty on his head. The name hit the cabin like a physical blow. Dr. Morrison paled visibly, and Sheriff Caldwell's hand closed around his gun butt. Even Ruby seemed to sense that something terrible was happening, though she couldn't understand what. $500? Caldwell breathed. "Are you certain, Judge?" "As certain as I can be without formal identification. But there's an easy way to confirm it." Blackwood stepped forward decisively. "Mr. Ravencrest, I know you're awake. The game is over." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, Colt opened his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost resigned. "Judge Blackwood, been a while." The confirmation sent shockwaves through the room. Dr. Morrison stumbled backward, his medical bag clutching forgotten in his hands. Sheriff Caldwell drew his weapon with a metallic whisper that seemed deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. "Well, well," Blackwood said with cold satisfaction. "Colt Ravencrest himself. I wondered when our paths would cross again." "Again?" Eva looked between them, confusion and fear warring in her voice. "Oh, yes." Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. "Mr. Ravencrest and I have history. He killed a very good friend of mine in Deadwood 2 years ago. Shot him down in the street like a dog." Colt's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny the accusation. Marcus Thornfield drew first. "It was a fair fight." "Fair?" Blackwood's voice rose with old anger. "You were hired to kill him. There was nothing fair about it." The weight of this revelation settled over Eva like a physical burden. She'd known Colt was dangerous, had known about his past, but hearing the details, hearing that this man had been a killer for hire, made it real in a way that abstract knowledge couldn't. "Mama?" Ruby whispered, pressing closer to Eva's side. "What's happening?" Eva pulled her daughter protectively against her, her mind racing. Everything was falling apart. Judge Blackwood would use this situation to destroy her, to take Ruby, to seize the homestead, and Colt would hang. "Sheriff Caldwell," Blackwood commanded, "arrest this man immediately." "Now hold on," Dr. Morrison interjected, finding his voice. "The man's wounded. Surely he can be moved to the jail once he's recovered." "The man is a killer, Doctor. I won't risk him escaping because of misplaced sympathy." Sheriff Caldwell looked uncertain. his weapon still trained on Colt, but his expression troubled. Judge, moving him in this condition could kill him. Then that would save the territory the cost of a trial, Blackwood replied coldly. The casual cruelty of the statement made Eva's blood run cold. She'd always known Blackwood was ruthless, but this was something beyond mere ambition. This was personal hatred. You can't take him, Eva heard herself say. He's still my patient. All eyes turned to her. Blackwood's expression showed genuine surprise. I beg your pardon? He's injured and under my care. As the only medical practitioner for 20 miles, I have the authority to determine when he's fit to be moved. Mrs. Blackthorne, Sheriff Caldwell said carefully, you're talking about harboring a known criminal. I'm talking about practicing medicine, Eva replied firmly. This man came to me dying. I saved his life. That makes him my responsibility until he's healed. Blackwood's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you saying you refuse to surrender him to lawful authority? I'm saying I won't let you kill a man in my home by moving him before he's ready. The standoff stretched between them, thick with tension and unspoken threats. Eva could feel Colt's eyes on her, but she didn't dare look at him. If she saw gratitude there, or worse, affection, it might break her resolve. This is highly irregular, Dr. Morrison murmured, though Eva couldn't tell if he was supporting her position or condemning it. Judge Blackwood stepped closer to Eva, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Mrs. Blackthorne, you're already walking a very thin line with the territorial authorities. Your unconventional lifestyle, your refusal to remarry, the rumors about your methods. Do you really want to add harboring criminals to that list? The threat was clear. Eva's hands tightened protectively around Ruby's shoulders. Everything she'd worked for, everything Thomas had built, was balanced on a knife's edge. But then she looked at Ruby's frightened face, and something hardened inside her. Her daughter had already lost one parent. She wouldn't lose her home too, not because Eva had been too cowardly to stand up for what was right. Judge Blackwood, Eva said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. You may own most of this territory, but you don't own me. This is my land, my home, and my patient. He stays until I say he's ready to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Caldwell looked between Eva and the judge, clearly uncomfortable with the position he'd been placed in. Dr. Morrison watched with fascination, as if seeing Eva clearly for the first time. But it was Colt who broke the silence. Eva, don't. She finally looked at him then, seeing pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. Don't what? Don't sacrifice yourself for me. I'm not worth it. That's not your decision to make. Isn't it? Colt's voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. You've got a daughter to think about. A life to protect. I'm just a killer with a price on his head. You're a man who brought medicine to save my child's life, Eva replied firmly. That's all that matters to me. Judge Blackwood watched this exchange with calculating interest. How touching. The notorious widow has found herself a murderer to defend. The territorial authorities will be very interested to hear about this. Let them hear, Eva said. I've broken no laws by providing medical care. Haven't you? Blackwood's smile was cold. Harboring a known fugitive, interfering with lawful arrest, corrupting a minor by exposing her to criminal influences. I can think of several charges that might apply. The threats were piling up like storm clouds, but Eva refused to back down. Then you'll have to prove them in court. Oh, I will. But first, I think a more immediate solution is called for. Blackwood turned to Sheriff Caldwell. Sheriff, I'm ordering you to arrest both Mrs. Blackthorne and Mr. Ravencrest. She can answer for her crimes alongside his. Eva felt the blood drain from her face. If they arrested her, what would happen to Ruby? Judge, Dr. Morrison protested, surely there's no need to arrest Mrs. Blackthorne. She's only trying to help. She's obstructing justice, Doctor. The law is clear on such matters. Sheriff Caldwell looked deeply uncomfortable. Judge, I'm not sure I can arrest Mrs. Blackthorne without more evidence of wrongdoing. Are you questioning my authority, Sheriff? No, sir, but then do your duty. Eva watched her world begin to crumble around her. In trying to protect Colt, she'd given Blackwood exactly what he needed to destroy her life. Ruby would be taken into custody, probably placed with relatives back east. The homestead would be seized. Everything Thomas had worked for would be lost. But then Colt spoke, his voice cutting through her despair like a lifeline. "There's just one problem with your plan, Judge." Blackwood turned toward him with irritation. "And what's that?" Colt slowly pushed himself upright in the chair, the blanket falling away to reveal that his gun belt was within easy reach. Despite his injury, despite being outnumbered, there was something dangerous and competent in his movement that made everyone in the room tense. "The problem is that you're threatening the woman who saved my life," Colt said quietly, "and I take that kind of thing personally." Sheriff Caldwell's gun was already drawn, but Colt's hand was resting casually near his weapon, and there was something in his posture that suggested the lawman's advantage might not be as clear-cut as it appeared. "You're wounded and outnumbered, Ravencrest," Blackwood said, though Eva noticed he'd taken a step backward. "Don't make this worse than it has to be." "Worse?" Colt's smile held no warmth. "Judge, you just threatened to arrest the woman who's been taking care of your community's medical needs for 3 years. You want to separate a little girl from the only mother she's ever known. Trust me, it's already as worse as it's going to get." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ava found herself holding her breath, aware that the next few moments would determine the fate of everyone in the room. And despite everything, despite the danger, despite the impossible odds, despite the fact that her world was falling apart, Eva felt a fierce surge of something that might have been hope. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't standing alone against Judge Blackwood's machinations. She had an ally, a dangerous, complicated, deadly ally, but an ally nonetheless. The question was whether that would be enough to save them all, or whether it would simply mean they'd go down fighting together. The cabin had become a powder keg with too many lit fuses. Eva could feel the violence coiled in the air, like a living thing, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Sheriff Caldwell's gun remained trained on Colt, but his hand was trembling slightly. Whether from cold or nerves, Eva couldn't tell. Judge Blackwood stood behind the sheriff, his face a mask of cold fury and calculation. Dr. Morrison pressed himself against the far wall, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. And in the middle of it all sat Colt Ravencrest, wounded but somehow still the most dangerous person in the room. "Nobody needs to die here today," Colt said, his voice calm and reasonable despite the circumstances. "Sheriff, you seem like a decent man. You really want to start a gunfight with a child in the room?" Sheriff Caldwell's eyes flicked toward Ruby, who was pressed against Eva's side, her small face pale with confusion and fear. "I don't want any trouble, Ravencrest, but you're a wanted man." "I am. Can't argue with that." Colt shifted slightly in his chair, and Eva noticed how Caldwell's grip tightened on his weapon. "But wanting and getting are two different things. You sure you're fast enough to take me before I put a bullet in the judge here?" "You wouldn't dare," Blackwood sputtered. "Killing a territorial judge would bring the full weight of the law down on you." Colt's smile was cold as winter steel. "Judge, I'm already looking at a hanging." "What's one more charge?" Eva watched this deadly chess match with growing desperation. She could see how it would end. Gunfire, blood, and Ruby traumatized by violence in what should have been the safety of her own home. "Stop," she said firmly, stepping forward despite the weapons. "All of you, just stop." "Eva, get back," Colt warned, but she ignored him. "This is my home," Eva declared, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "My daughter is terrified, and you're all standing here threatening to kill each other like this is some kind of saloon brawl." "Mrs. Blackthorne," Sheriff Caldwell said carefully, "please step away from the prisoner. He's not a prisoner. He's a patient who sought shelter during a blizzard." Eva's voice grew stronger with each word. "And I won't have violence in my home." Judge Blackwood's patience finally snapped. "Enough of this nonsense, Sheriff. Arrest them both, or I'll find someone who will—" "You'll find someone who will what, exactly?" The new voice came from the doorway, and everyone turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright snow outside. The man stepped into the cabin, and Eva's heart leaped with unexpected relief. "Deputy Marshal Warren," Dr. Morrison breathed. "Thank God." U.S. Deputy Marshal Jake Warren was a lean, Weathered man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and the quiet confidence that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. He surveyed the scene with professional interest, taking in the drawn weapons and tense faces. Judge Blackwood, Warren said with polite neutrality. Sheriff Caldwell. Interesting way to conduct official business. Marshal Warren, Blackwood began, his tone immediately shifting to one of wounded dignity. We've discovered that Mrs. Blackthorne has been harboring a dangerous fugitive. Colt Ravencrest is wanted for multiple murders. Warren's eyes found Colt, and something unreadable passed across his features. Is that so? Well, Mr. Ravencrest, you certainly get around. Marshal, Colt acknowledged with a slight nod. Didn't expect to see you in these parts. Life's full of surprises. Warren stepped fully into the cabin, his presence somehow diffusing the immediate tension. Sheriff, you can lower your weapon. I'll handle this. Caldwell looked uncertain. Sir, Judge Blackwood ordered. Judge Blackwood doesn't give orders to federal marshals, Warren said mildly. Now why don't you all explain what's happening here? Before anyone else could speak, Eva stepped forward. Marshal Warren, this man arrived during the blizzard, badly wounded and near death. I provided medical care. That's all. Is it? Warren's gaze was penetrating but not unkind. And you knew who he was when you helped him? Eva hesitated, aware that her answer could determine everything that followed. I knew he was dangerous. I didn't know he was wanted by federal authorities. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Warren studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see. And Mr. Ravencrest, what's your version of events? Colt's answer was direct and unflinching. I was shot, lost a lot of blood, barely made it here before the storm hit. Mrs. Blackthorne saved my life. I told her who I was and what I'd done. She had every right to turn me away, but she didn't. Touching, Judge Blackwood interjected coldly. Now perhaps we can get on with the arrest. Warren turned his attention to the judge. Actually, Judge, there might be a complication with that. What kind of complication? The kind where Mr. Ravencrest isn't technically a fugitive anymore. The words fell into the cabin like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and confusion. What do you mean? Sheriff Caldwell demanded. Warren reached into his coat and pulled out an official-looking document. Presidential pardon, signed 3 days ago. Conditional, but valid. Mr. Ravencrest has been working with federal authorities for the past 8 months, providing information about certain criminal organizations. Eva felt her knees go weak with relief. Beside her, Ruby looked up with wide eyes, not understanding the legal complexities, but sensing the change in atmosphere. Judge Blackwood's face went through several shades of color before settling on an alarming shade of purple. That's impossible. No one told me about any federal operation. That's because it was classified, Judge. Need-to-know basis. Warren's voice was polite but firm. And you didn't need to know. But he's a killer, Blackwood sputtered. He murdered Marcus Thornfield in cold blood. Actually, Warren said, consulting his document, that particular incident was what convinced federal authorities that Mr. Ravencrest might be useful. Seems Marcus Thornfield was running a counterfeiting operation that was flooding the territory with fake currency. When Mr. Ravencrest eliminated him, he did the government a favor. Eva stared at Colt, seeing him in an entirely new light. You were working for the government? Not at first, Colt replied quietly. At first, I was just trying to stay alive. But when they offered me a chance to make things right, he shrugged. Seemed better than hanging. This is outrageous, Judge Blackwood declared. Even if this pardon is legitimate, it doesn't excuse Mrs. Blackthorne's behavior. She knowingly harbored a man she believed to be a criminal. Marshal Warren considered this. Did she know he was wanted by federal authorities? She knew he was dangerous. That's not what I asked, Judge. Warren's voice carried a hint of steel. Mrs. Blackthorne, did you know Mr. Ravencrest was wanted by federal law enforcement? Eva met his gaze steadily. No, Marshal. I knew he had a violent past, but I didn't know about any federal warrants. Then she's guilty of nothing more than Christian charity. Warren folded the document and returned it to his coat, which last I checked wasn't a crime in Colorado territory. Judge Blackwood's expression grew even more thunderous. This is far from over, Marshall. There are other considerations. Mrs. Blackthorn's fitness as a mother, her ability to maintain this homestead alone, the propriety of her situation. All of which are civil matters, not federal ones, Warren replied. You'll have to pursue those through appropriate channels. The threat was clear, but it had lost its immediate bite. Eva knew that Blackwood would continue his campaign to take Ruby and seize the homestead, but for now the immediate danger had passed. Come on, Sheriff, Blackwood said curtly. We're wasting our time here. Sheriff Caldwell holstered his weapon with obvious relief. Mrs. Blackthorn, I apologize for the confusion. Mr. Ravencrest Marshall. Dr. Morrison, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Mrs. Blackthorn, if you need anything for your patient, please let me know. Your medical skills continue to impress me. After the three men left, an awkward silence settled over the cabin. Marshal Warren remained, studying both Eva and Colt with professional interest. Well, he said finally, that was interesting. Is he really pardoned? Eva asked. He is. Conditionally, as I said. Warren's expression grew serious. The condition is that he continue to cooperate with federal authorities as needed, and that he stay out of trouble. Define trouble, Colt said dryly. The kind that gets innocent women and children threatened by corrupt judges, Warren replied. Judge Blackwood has been on our radar for a while. His mining operations have some questionable financial backing, and there are rumors about claim jumping and intimidation. Eva felt a chill of fear. Is Ruby in danger? Not immediately, but Blackwood doesn't like to lose, and he's not going to forget what happened here today. Warren looked between them. You two might want to think about what comes next. What do you mean? Eva asked. I mean, a presidential pardon doesn't make someone respectable overnight. And a widow living alone with a notorious gunslinger isn't going to win any popularity contest with the territorial authorities. The implications of his words settled over Eva like a cold blanket. She'd saved Colt's life and protected him from arrest. But in doing so, she'd made enemies who wouldn't forgive or forget. So what do you suggest? Colt asked. Marshal Warren smiled, and for the first time since entering the cabin, he looked genuinely amused. I suggest you figure out how to make this arrangement look respectable before Judge Blackwood decides to make it a federal case. With that cryptic advice, he tipped his hat to Eva, nodded to Colt, and headed for the door. Marshal, Eva called after him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Blackthorn. The real test is just beginning. As the door closed behind him, Eva found herself alone with Colt and Ruby, facing an uncertain future that was somehow both more hopeful and more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. The storm outside had ended, but the storm in her life was just beginning. 3 weeks after Marshal Warren's visit, Eva stood on her porch watching the sunset behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The immediate crisis had passed, but the underlying tensions remained. Judge Blackwood had retreated, but she knew he was planning his next move. And Colt had stayed. His wound had healed enough for travel over a week ago, yet each morning he found new reasons to remain. A fence that needed mending, firewood that required splitting, tracks around the property that needed investigating. Eva told herself she allowed it because the extra help was useful, but she knew the truth was more complicated. Mama, look! Ruby's delighted voice drew Eva's attention to where her daughter was building snow angels near the barn. Colt knelt beside her, helping her perfect the wings with the serious concentration he brought to everything involving Ruby. Over the past weeks, Eva had watched their relationship develop with amazement. Colt was patient with Ruby in ways that surprised everyone, especially himself. He answered her endless questions, listened to her stories, and treated her childish observations with the respect most adults reserve for profound wisdom. Mr. Colt, Ruby said now, using the name she'd settled on, despite Eva's attempts to maintain formality, do you think angels get cold in the winter? I imagine they have special angel coats, Colt replied seriously, probably made of starlight and moonbeams. Ruby giggled at this fancy. That sounds warm. And pretty, too. Just like someone else I know, Colt said, tapping Ruby's nose gently. Eva felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This was the man people called the Raven, the notorious gunslinger whose name was whispered in fear across 3 territories. Yet here he was, discussing angel coats with a 6-year-old as if it were the most important conversation in the world. Mrs. Blackthorne? Eva turned to find Dr. Morrison approaching on horseback, his medical bag secured behind his saddle. He'd taken to visiting more frequently since the confrontation with Judge Blackwood, though Eva suspected his concern was more social than medical. "Doctor, what brings you out in this cold?" Dr. Morrison dismounted, his weathered face creased with worry. "I'm afraid I have some news you need to hear. Judge Blackwood has been busy since his last visit." Eva's stomach tightened. "What kind of busy?" "He's filed a formal petition with the territorial governor, claiming that your arrangement poses a danger to Ruby's moral development. He's requesting a formal custody hearing." The words hit Eva like a physical blow. She'd been expecting something like this, but the reality was still devastating. "When?" she managed to ask. 2 weeks. The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today in Denver." "Denver?" Eva's voice rose with alarm. "That's a 3-day journey each way. I can't leave the homestead for that long in winter." "That may be the point," Dr. Morrison said gently. "If you don't appear, the judge wins by default." Eva felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. Blackwood had found the perfect trap, force her to choose between defending herself in court or maintaining the homestead that was her livelihood. "What exactly is he claiming?" Colt's voice came from behind her. Eva turned to see him approaching, his expression dark with anger. "Moral corruption, improper supervision, exposure to criminal influences," Dr. Morrison recited reluctantly. "He's claiming that Mrs. Blackthorne's association with you makes her unfit to raise a child." "And he's probably right," Colt said quietly. "What?" Eva stared at him in shock. "Think about it, Eva. A notorious gunslinger living with a widow and her daughter. Even with the federal pardon, it looks bad. Blackwood knows that." "So what are you suggesting?" Eva's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I'm suggesting I should leave. Tonight. Disappear and take the problem with me." "Absolutely not." Eva's response was immediate and fierce. "You're not running away because that bastard wants to play power games." "Eva, don't Eva me. I didn't save your life just to have you abandon us when things get difficult." Dr. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps there's another solution." Both Eva and Colt turned to him with questioning looks. "Marriage," the doctor said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot's echo. Eva felt her face flame with embarrassment while Colt went completely still. "I beg your pardon?" Eva managed to say. "It's quite simple, really. Judge Blackwood's petition is based on the impropriety of your current arrangement. A marriage would eliminate that objection entirely." "Dr. Morrison," Eva said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but I hardly think a marriage of convenience is the answer to—" "Who said anything about convenience?" Colt interrupted quietly. Eva's words died in her throat. She turned to stare at him, not sure she'd heard correctly. "I said, who mentioned convenience?" Colt's gray eyes held hers steadily. "Maybe it's time we talked about what's really been happening here." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Colt stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone meant only for her. "Eva, I've watched you with Ruby, seen how you care for everyone around you, witnessed your courage when you stood up to Blackwood. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever met." Eva's heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Colt, I know I'm not what anyone would choose for you. I know my reputation, my past, the danger that follows me. But I also know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "What about Ruby?" Eva whispered. "What kind of life would this give her?" "A life with 2 parents who love her and would die to protect her," Colt replied without hesitation. "A life where she never has to worry about being taken away from the only home she's ever known." Dr. Morrison diplomatically withdrew a few steps, pretending to check on his horse while the conversation continued. "This is insane," Eva said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? More insane than letting Blackwood destroy everything you've built? More insane than separating Ruby from the only mother she's ever known?" Eva looked toward Ruby, who was still playing in the snow, completely oblivious to the adult drama unfolding nearby. The thought of losing her daughter was unbearable, but the thought of marrying Colt Ravencrest— "I won't trap you into a marriage just to solve my problems," Eva said firmly. "You're not trapping me." "I'm asking." Colt's voice was rough with emotion. "Eva, I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I'm asking you to marry me because I love you. I love Ruby. I love this life we've started building together." The words hit Eva like a landslide, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "You love me? I've been in love with you since the day you stood between me and Blackwood's threats, knowing it could cost you everything." Colt's smile was soft and vulnerable. "Maybe since the day you pulled a bullet out of my chest and told me I was worth saving." Eva felt tears stinging her eyes. "Colt, Mr. Colt!" "Mama!" Ruby's voice interrupted them. She was running toward the cabin, her face bright with excitement. "Look what I found!" She held up a small object that glinted in the fading sunlight. As she got closer, Eva could see it was a ring, a simple gold band that must have been hidden in the snow. "Where did you find that, sweetheart?" Eva asked. "By the old tree stump where you said Papa used to sit," Ruby replied breathlessly. "Do you think it was his?" Eva's breath caught. Thomas had indeed spent many evenings sitting on that old stump, watching the sunset and planning improvements to the homestead. The ring could very well have been his, perhaps lost during one of those contemplative sessions. "It might be," Eva said softly, taking the ring from Ruby's small hands. It was worn smooth with age, clearly well-loved. "Maybe Papa left it for you to find when you needed it," Ruby suggested with the simple faith of childhood. Eva stared at the ring, and suddenly everything seemed crystal clear. Thomas had loved this land, had wanted to build a life here filled with family and happiness. He'd been taken too soon, but maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way to help her continue that dream. "Eva," Colt said quietly, "I know I'm not Thomas. I know I can't replace what you lost, but I can promise you that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the life you're offering." Eva looked from the ring to Colt's face, seeing honesty and hope there instead of the hardened gunslinger she'd first encountered. Then she looked at Ruby, who was watching them both with bright, curious eyes. "Ruby," Eva said carefully, "how would you feel if Mr. Colt became part of our family?" "If he stayed with us always," Ruby's face lit up with joy. "Really? He could be my papa? Would you like that?" "Yes." Ruby launched herself at Colt, who caught her in a gentle hug. "I always wanted a papa again, and Mr. Colt tells the best stories and he makes you smile, Mama." Over Ruby's head, Colt's eyes met Eva's. "So what do you say, Eva Blackthorne? Will you marry a reformed gunslinger and give us all a chance at happiness?" Eva looked at the ring in her palm, then at the man who'd brought medicine through a blizzard to save her daughter's life, who'd been willing to face down armed men to protect them, who'd shown Ruby more gentleness than she'd known since Thomas died. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Colt Ravencrest. I'll marry you." Dr. Morrison, who had been pretending not to listen, broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Pardon my language, Mrs. Blackthorne, but I think this calls for a celebration." As Colt pulled Eva into his arms, Ruby dancing around them with delight, Eva felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the certainty that everything was going to be all right. Judge Blackwood could bring his custody hearing. Let him try to claim that a stable, married couple couldn't provide a proper home for Ruby. Let him try to take away their land or their happiness. He'd find out exactly why Colt Ravencrest had earned his reputation, and why Eva Blackthorne had never backed down from a fight in her life. Together they were stronger than any storm. 6 months later, Eva Ravencrest stood in the same spot on her porch where she'd first heard the sound of a dying horse in the snow. But now, instead of wind and desperation, the air was filled with the sounds of life and laughter. Ruby's delighted squeals echoed across the meadow as Colt taught her to ride the gentle mare he'd bought for her 8th birthday. His patience with their daughter, for Ruby was truly their daughter now, in every way that mattered, continued to amaze Eva daily. The feared gunslinger known as the Raven had become the most devoted father in 3 territories. "Higher, Papa Colt," Ruby called out, completely fearless as she guided the horse through a series of careful turns. Not too high, Eva called back, though she was smiling. I don't want my daughter thinking she's a circus performer. Colt's answering laughter carried across the distance, warm and genuine. The sound never failed to make Eva's heart skip a beat, even after months of marriage. Especially after months of marriage, if she was being honest. Their wedding had been simple. Dr. Morrison officiating, Marshall Warren and his wife as witnesses, and Ruby scattering wildflowers she'd picked herself. Judge Blackwood had tried to contest the marriage, claiming it was fraudulent, but his legal challenge had crumbled when faced with the obvious, genuine affection between the newlyweds. The custody hearing had been canceled, the petition withdrawn, and Blackwood had quietly retreated to focus on his mining interests. Word around Crimson Falls was that federal investigators were taking a very close look at his business practices, a development that Marshall Warren seemed to know nothing about, though his satisfied smile suggested otherwise. Mrs. Ravencrest? A voice interrupted Eva's thoughts. She turned to see a young woman approaching on foot, carrying a worn traveling bag and wearing the determined expression of someone who'd come a very long way for a very important reason. Yes, Eva replied, stepping down from the porch. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I've traveled from Kansas. I heard, that is, people said, you might be able to help me. Eva studied the woman more closely. She was perhaps 25, with tired eyes and the kind of careful composure that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer will. What kind of help are you looking for, Miss Mitchell? I'm running from my husband. He hurts me, and now he's started threatening my son. Sarah's voice broke slightly. I heard there was a woman up here who'd stood up to powerful men, who'd built a safe place. I hoped. Eva felt her heart clench with sympathy and recognition. How many women were trapped in situations like Sarah's? How many needed help but had nowhere to turn? How old is your son? Eva asked gently. 5. He's with my sister in Kansas. I came ahead to see if... Sarah's words trailed off as she looked around the homestead with desperate hope. Eva made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. Colt! She called out. Her husband looked up from where he was helping Ruby dismount from her horse. Something in Eva's tone brought him quickly to her side, Ruby skipping along behind him. This is Sarah Mitchell, Eva explained. She needs our help. Colt studied the woman with the same protective instincts Eva had seen him display toward anyone vulnerable. What kind of help? The kind you're good at providing, Eva replied meaningfully. Understanding flickered in Colt's eyes. He'd made several mysterious trips over the past few months, journeys that coincided with certain abusive husbands in distant towns suddenly developing a strong desire to leave their wives alone permanently. I see, Colt said simply. Well, Mrs. Mitchell, I think we can definitely help you. And your son, of course. As they led Sarah into the cabin, Eva felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. This was what the homestead was meant to be. Not just a place where she and Colt and Ruby could build their happiness, but a sanctuary for anyone who needed protection, healing, or a second chance. Mama, Ruby whispered as they prepared tea for their unexpected guest. Are we going to help her like you helped Papa Colt? Yes, sweetheart. We're going to help her find her way home. But she already left home. Eva smiled, thinking of her own journey from frightened widow to confident wife and mother. Sometimes, Ruby, you have to leave the place you came from to find the place where you belong. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of hope and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who needed help, new adventures for their growing family. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together, safe, and ready to face whatever the frontier brought their way. Because sometimes the most dangerous storms bring exactly what you need to build a new life. And sometimes the most feared men make the most gentle fathers. And sometimes love really does conquer all. If this story of courage, redemption, and unexpected love touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible Wild West tales. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Have you ever had to make a choice between safety and doing what's right? What would you have done in Eva's place? Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest frontier adventures. Until next time, Remember that sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Thanks for riding along with us on this Wild West journey. Keep your hearts open and your spirits strong, and we'll see you in the next story.